know that phrase, the Great Reset, and you'll own nothing and be happy? Need to be very, very, very concerned about how that will play out going forward. Hey up, welcome back, and this morning, bit of a podcast really, so if you don't want to watch my fat face for the next few minutes, then feel free to go to audio only and enjoy the dubious wisdom of my take on life while you're driving or cleaning or whatever. Any road up. What I thought I'd talk about today is my sort of take on why the establishment seems to be so hugely invested in the electric vehicle agenda. Excuse me. So yeah, why does it appear that, notwithstanding there being other avenues for exploration around alternatives to the internal combustion engine, why is it that the only option that we're being offered, and the only option that we're likely to be offered, is the EV option, the electric vehicle option, whether it's cars or whether it's motorcycles? And it looks very much like people in power have decided that the likes of you and me are not going to have a choice in the future as to which we're going to have. It's either you're going to have electric or you're not going to have anything at all, personal transport wise. So why is that? Because in a fair world, of course, you'd have a situation where you could walk into a motorcycle showroom, motorcycle dealership somewhere, couldn't you? And there'd be a selection of internal combustion engine motorcycles and a selection of electrically powered motorcycles, and you'd be able to make an objective choice based upon your own needs, your own budget, and possibly your own beliefs. So but it's quite apparent, isn't it, that the powers that be don't want to give us that breadth of choice going forward. Electric, take it or leave it, no alternative, and an almost obsessive policy to the exclusion of all other alternatives. Those alternatives being, you know, hydrogen and cleaner petrochemical fuels and all the rest of it. But no, it's got to be electric. So why? And when you take into account, of course, the fact that the whole electric crusade, if you like, is built on shifting sands. It's not on firm foundations at all, either in terms of the charging infrastructure, the ability of people to charge vehicles at home, the capital outlay for electric vehicles themselves, the practicalities around range, and of course the carbon footprint associated with the repeated production of batteries, which have a finite lifetime. So you would think anybody, particularly at government level, who was considering how to legislate for this wholesale change, would take into account all of the factors at hand. But no, we've clearly got a one-trick pony approach to quote unquote the green agenda when it comes to personal transport. Why, I wonder, is that the case? And I think it's less to do with all of those issues and less to do with vested interests, although it's certainly something to do with vested interests and the amount of cash that's been ploughed into the EV agenda. But I think it's more to do with human nature, and human nature particularly as expressed by people already have a lot of power, who are used to having power, used to having influence and patronage. And why do I say that? Well, let me illustrate it, and bear with me, because I might go off at a bit of a tangent here, but bear with me. There is rationale in this madness. So I want to go back to a little tale from when I were coppering, when I were in policing, back in, and I'm going to go as far back as 1984. So back in 1984, I'm just a constable working in Bradford city centre, and back then the structural setup of the force were a bit odd. In as much as you had areas called divisions, and those areas had smaller areas called subdivisions, and they all had their individual hierarchical command structure. But the two big city centre divisions, Leeds and Bradford, they were both a subdivision and a division in their own right, so they were one and the same thing within the same geographical boundaries, which didn't make an awful lot of sense to me at the time, still doesn't for that matter. But you still had the same command structure in place. So for Bradford city centre, a tiny city centre division with hardly any residents, a really transient population, and not a lot going on other than public order and shoplifting and a few traffic offences. You had there was a very top heavy, I think largely symbolic command structure. So being a division, the divisional officer, the guy that ran that division, the head of that division, they all had to be chief superintendents. They had to be chief superintendent rank, very senior rank indeed. So Bradford Central had a chief superintendent in charge of it, and that chief superintendent had a deputy who was a superintendent, a deputy divisional officer. But then, because it was a subdivision as well, the subdivision had as its subdivisional officer a superintendent, and he had a deputy divisional officer that were a chief inspector. So you had chief superintendent, two superintendents, and a chief inspector, all running this small outfit. So talk about top heavy, and it does somewhat go to explain the tale that I'm going to tell you. So the backdrop was, back in 1984, the powers that be decided that they wanted to create this nostalgic vibe to the force, where we went back to old values, which in many ways wasn't a bad thing. But they tried to do it in a very superficial way. And one way that they tried to do it, would you believe, is uniformed officers who drove cars prior to then wore flat caps, because obviously you can't wear a British policeman's tall helmet while you're driving a car. So they used to wear the flat cap with the blue and white checkered band that I'm sure you're familiar with. And it was decided that this looked a little bit too paramilitary and not traditional enough. So it was decided that as well as bobbies on the beat, that they're walking around on foot patrol wearing tall helmets, which was fair enough, also those driving cars, with the exception of road traffic, the guys with the white tops on the caps, they could keep the flat caps, and officers of the rank of inspector or above, who'd always worn flat caps, could keep flat caps, but PCs and sergeants couldn't unless they were in traffic, or task force as it was called back then, which was a centralised support unit really. But other than that, rank and file cops driving cars from job to job to job in territorial divisions within the force suddenly had to carry their helmet with them in the car. And because they became, the force, certainly at a senior level, became absolutely hardwired into this philosophy. A culture emerged whereby probably the most heinous sin that you could commit as a copper was to be found anywhere in public without your helmet on. To the exclusion of any excuse, any reasonable set of circumstances to account for it. It became a mortal sin, basically, not to have your helmet on. Well, as you can imagine, if you're flying from job to job in a Panda car and you haven't got a cap that you can wear while you're driving the car, and you have to dive out of your car to go stop somebody fighting, or go catch a criminal, or run after somebody that's abandoned a stolen car, or anything that might require your immediate response, you didn't have time to go fumbling around in back seat for your helmet to put it on and make sure it was straight and level, and then go and try and run after somebody with this thing perched on your head. It were absolutely ludicrous, but I kid you not, this is the route the force had gone down at that point. And the point I'm trying to make is that when people become obsessed with a single approach to any particular agenda, they become absolutely peripherally blinded to all other aspects of rationale and common sense and reason. It goes out the window. This were a classic example. So I'll just give you a little tale of how this played out in my service, basically. One morning I was this is 1984. I was on mobile patrol, very, very unusually back then. I'd managed to get to be an authorised police driver with just 10 months service in, which were pretty unheard of, but that's another tale. So, and it made me very, very unpopular with some colleagues, I hasten to add. But anyway, I got to be a driver early on in my career, so I only had about 10 months in. And this here policy of wear your helmet in your car had come in. So I'm driving my Vauxhall Chevette Panda car around Bradford, and I'm just about to go up Manchester Road, and I sees that the traffic coming down Manchester Road, which is a main primary route into Bradford city centre, very, very busy road indeed, are absolutely gridlocked, as far as the eye could see, right up to the top end of town, out of our division. So I thought, well, I better take a look at this, because there were a lot of people trying to get to work that time in the morning, about 8 o'clock in the morning, see what crack is. Might have been an accident, you never know. So I drives up, and I can see at the head of all this all of this traffic, this broken down Ford Fiesta, and this forlorn looking woman with a bonnet up, scratching her head, and nothing really going anywhere, and cars weaving their way around it, and a bit chaotic really. So I thought I'd best go and help. So I dutifully put my helmet on, got out of the car, went over to the other carriageway, spoke to the lady in question, and thought, well, maybe this is something that I can fix, potentially. Maybe this is something I can sort out. So I thought, well, could be battery, could be well, back then distributor points, HT leads popped out, something like that. So I took my helmet off. and I put my helmet down on the central reservation at the side of the road, and I'm grubbing around underneath the bonnet of this here Ford Fiesta, trying to find out what's wrong with it. And next thing, I hears this voice saying, officer, put your helmet on immediately. And I thought, who's that? And so I looks round, and it's the divisional officer, the chief superintendent. Officer, put your helmet on immediately. And, well, I'm sure you won't have tried, but sticking your head under the bonnet of a broken down car and trying to fix it with a police helmet on is impossible. And I try to explain, it were obvious what I were doing. It were absolutely, obviously, blindingly obvious what I were doing. Officer, get your helmet on straight away. And I'm like, but, put... Anyway, there were no reasoning about it whatsoever. So I said to the lady, I'm sorry, you going to need to call the AA or whatever. I'm not really going to be able to help you here. Puts my helmet on. And of course she says, who's that terribly rude man? And I said, well, he's the big boss. He's the big boss of the division. You know, sorry, there's nothing I can do about it, like, so. Anyway, so bottom line is there. I don't know whether I could have got her started or not, but it were a clear case of doing what was necessary to help a member of the public. Not a word of a lie. And by the time I got back for my meal break to division, I were hauled in front of the chief inspector, who gave me another dressing down, because obviously he'd had a dressing down from the big boss. And the big boss said, you need to get a grip on your bloody your constables here, and driving cars and getting out without their helmet on, and one thing and another. And I explained to him, now the chief inspector were a thoroughly reasonable, good man for whom I have had and have enormous respect. And of course, because he'd had the word from on high, it were his responsibility to at least do something. And he sort of gave me a wink, which sort of said, look lad, you know I've got to do this, but it don't make no sense. And it didn't. So what does that tell you? What it actually tells you is, and I want the only one to get a right royal stuffing for not wearing a police helmet in circumstances where it were nigh on impossible or utterly impractical to wear a police helmet and do your job properly. An example of blind pursuit of one single policy without any notion of taking into account all the other issues, which are real world practical issues. Now that, I think that is a classic illustration. It's not the only example. That is a classic illustration of where a mindset can develop around a particular agenda to the complete exclusion of all other aspects of fairness and equality and common sense and good faith and public service. All out the window because of an obsession with some notion about what things should look like. So I'll leave that one with you. What do you think? But I think that's what's going on with the electric vehicle agenda in general. We've got exactly that mindset. Everybody who is anybody on high, the powers that be, have become so hardwired into this EV option around addressing the net zero and climate change and the green agenda. The notion of taking into account anything else, however logical, however reasonable, it's just out the window. And that's why we're not going to be offered a choice. That's why other avenues are not being invested in or explored to the extent that they should be, and why ultimately fewer and fewer and fewer of us will be able to use personal private transport in the future. You know that phrase, the Great Reset, and you'll own nothing and be happy? Need to be very, very, very concerned about how that will play out going forward. So yeah, that's the bottom line. I think that the plan is that because electric vehicles or electric motorcycles for most people will become completely unaffordable, the option is that unless you're particularly well off, you won't have independent free private transport. Hope that was of some interest to you. If it was, please leave a like, click subscribe. If you want to hear me droning on again, click that notifications bell. And I just hope that little tale from the 1980s policing sort of helps illustrate the point. Okay, thanks for tuning in. Till the next time, ride safe, be kind, and I'll catch you later. Toodle pip.